On behalf of Four Seasons Garden Club, I would like to welcome Luke Macauley, who joins us from the University of Maryland Extension Service. He is the Wildlife Management Specialist, and we should start by congratulating him for just getting tenure. So that's very exciting to have Dr. Macauley here at this time. He's gonna talk about the components of managing deer damage, moderating the habitat to adjust it so that deer are not so attracted, and deer sprays and all kinds of other techniques that can be used to prevent deer damage on our beloved plants. So I will turn it over to Luke at this point.
Thank you, Olivia. Awesome to be invited, and thank you for the honor. And I will invite anybody who is here if they'd like to just unmute, ask questions, interrupt. We've got a small group, so I'm happy to just dive in. Um, so, as Olivia said, I am the wildlife management specialist for University of Maryland Extension, and I do a lot of work on deer damage and especially crop damage is a big angle of what I work on. But I do a lot on habitat improvement as well, because I find also there's a lot of folks that want to improve habitat for wildlife and want certain types of wildlife. They just don't want the ones that are eating in their gardens. So I do a lot of work on recovering the northern bobwhite, which is a quail that is Maryland's #1 declining bird. It used to be abundant across the state, and it's disappeared across most of the state. So we're working a lot on trying to restore those populations and the habitat on the ground that not only would recover those bobwhites, but also pollinators and wild turkeys and all sorts of songbirds and grassland birds that would do well. So that's a whole nother avenue, aspect of what I work on. But when I started this position, they created this position because there was significant crop damage and garden damage as well. And so and I have this picture as my first shot. This is a deer in a soybean field. Now, it's at night for a reason. I picked that picture for a reason because a lot of our damage occurs at night, and it just illustrates the challenges of dealing with this kind of damage. So I will start by saying a lot of this research was made possible. And I will say a lot of my work is oriented towards agriculture, but all of the principles apply to gardening. It's just at a different scale. So some of these things will be like on this agricultural scale, but we'll think about it in terms of like your garden. So this guide here on the left, it's online. I'll put a link in the chat. You can just Google 4 Pillars Managing Deer Damage, Luke Macauley, and it'll pop up. Really nice, slick presentation. It turned into a book. I think it's like 40 or 50 pages long. And I will say a lot of this work was made possible through the Maryland Soybean Board, the Delaware Soybean Board, because they have such an intense damage from deer that they wanted to do some work to help find out what they could do to reduce the losses. And I would estimate in Maryland, the last public official survey estimated $10 million a year. I think it's probably more on the order of $50 to $100 million a year are lost in agriculture due to deer damage. And that's based on a variety of things that I found over the years, sort of back of the envelope. And it's a big range because it varies. But let's dive in. You can find everything you can dream of that I've thought about over the last 3 years and in this booklet. So it's a good resource if you wanted to dive in on any of these topics. So I like to give a little outline once I'm speaking so you guys know what to expect. So start with the problem. Talk a little bit about the biology and behavior and like how that might inform the next topic, which is management. And we're going to cover these 4 items on management: habitat, fencing, repellents, and hunting. Not all of these are going to work for everybody. And I even tell farmers, not all of these work for them either. So, but I like to just give a broad overview because maybe there are some aspects of these things that might fit into your management program. So farming. Imagine you're a farmer and you have this nice, beautiful farm and it's 35 acres and you're gardening at scale. You're gardening in a 35-acre scale, but you're surrounded by 1,000 acres of woods. And here's an aerial picture, drone imagery we took of this farm. This is actually in Delaware. And I want to draw your attention to this little dot here. Right in the middle of that circle, you see a little green dot. Let me see if my cursor is right there. We're going to zoom in on that. Look at that little perfect green circle right there. And you might be wondering, what is that? Are aliens coming and doing crop circles or something? No, it's a deer exclusion. So it just helps illustrate the level of impact of grazing, of deer grazing on even on very big types of farming situations or large scale gardens. And it doesn't just impact our farmers, it impacts our forests. This is on a forest that has actually been cut. This most of this woods on the left here has been cut down. And that is for a variety of reasons. We're trying to bring back habitat for early, we call early successional vegetation. But what I really want to draw your attention to is this line at about 5 feet tall. There's a perfect line through those woods, and there's no vegetation. If you're an animal that lives on the ground and needs something to live under 5 feet, then you're in trouble in this environment in a lot of cases. There's no groceries, especially if you're a herbivore. There's no groceries in the pantry. So, so this deer damage issue affects our forests. This is what a lot of our forest understories look like. Now, this is a combination of a couple of things. One is deer certainly graze a lot of the understory out of these forests. But two, our forests, there's a lot of different structures of forests that evolved over time, over millennia, hundreds of years. And some people, and I think people with a lot of information and background on this and research, suggest this is not really a natural forest. We might think this looks really natural. But historically in Maryland, most of Maryland, we would have had natural fires coming through every 4 to 12 years. And that fire would have thinned out some of these trees. It would have killed some of these smaller trees, or the ones that are less fire tolerant. And it would have been a very different type of forest. I think I'm working on a publication now where we talk about different structures of forest with like a thick understory, a thin understory, a savanna, all different types of forests that could be out there. So this is a combination of deer grazing, but also fire exclusion, where all the trees have survived and have created a very close canopy and a lot of shade. So not a lot of stuff can grow. Even if you didn't have deer, there wouldn't be a lot of sunlight reaching the ground to even grow plants in this environment. Although it will grow plants. I put out a deer exposure out in an area. This is not far from my backyard. And I was amazed when I put this little exposure up to see how much green vegetation was growing when I put that clover that up. This is a little bit of food plot species that I planted to sort of see how they would do. And I was surprised when I got down there. This is early. This is probably February, March. Things are starting to warm up. These are cool season plants, and they did surprisingly well inside that fence. And I wouldn't have known if I didn't put that fence up. So these little fences, I'm going to teach you how to do these and talk about these in the talk. But just shows like these sort of impacts that are very imperceptible that happen. So talk about the problem. Now we're going to get into some deer biology and behavior. Then we'll skip on the management. Okay, so this is a chart of deer activity by hour of the day. If you've ever read up on deer biology, you've probably seen a talk on this. This pattern is a bimodal pattern where you have a lot of activity. So the y-axis, the height of that line graph is the number of pictures of deer we saw on automated caught camera traps. So you see at 5 a.m., we had a peak of camera detections. There's a lot of deer out getting pictures taken of them. And this is from, I think, 10 or 15 cameras that were running over the course of a year or two on some farms. And then they go and bed down during the day. And so there's very little activity in the daytime. And then it spikes back up in the evening. Oftentimes a little bit more activity in the evening than even in the morning. And that activity will it'll decline after around like 8 or 9 o'clock, an hour or two after sunset, but they will still stay active a lot during the night as well. So this pattern is called crepuscular activity, where animals are active in the morning and the evening. And that's what you see here. So that's at the daily scale. And so I'm showing this so we can start thinking about this in terms of managing deer. This is on over the course of 60 days in the summer. Now, this is a soybean field, but I will say there's not a whole lot of things that deer love more than soybeans. They're high protein, highly palatable, and very, very attractive to deer. So the height of these bars is also number of pictures taken of deer that were grazing, not just deer walking by, deer that were sitting there and had leaves in their mouth. And I had a couple of undergrads help with analyzing all this data. So the higher that bar, the higher the number of pictures we had. The color of those bars, if it was orange, that yellow gold color, it was taken during the daytime, which is actually is during legal shooting hours for hunting, which is 30 minutes before sunrise and 30 minutes after sunset. So you can still see, that's when that gold color is. And you can just glance at this picture, and I think I have some summary stats on this, but approximately, I believe, first off, the majority of the pictures you can see are in blue. They were taken at night. So the deer are more active at night after 30 minutes after sunset or before 30 minutes before sunrise. So when it's still quite dark outside. And then I think it was about 75% of the images were taken at night. So that's interesting. The second thing that's really interesting that you might be picking up and wondering about as you look at this chart, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days right here that were these extreme peaks of activity. And we had a lot of days where there were hardly any pictures. There might have been 10 or 15 pictures. If you add up all the pictures of these top 5 days, it accounted to about half, a little under half of all the pictures in the whole 60-day period on 5 days and nights. So something to think about. Also something that makes this particularly challenging because they'll go 4, 5, 6 days. You don't see a lot of activity of deer, and then they will hit it, and they will hit it hard all at once. Now we've seen that over 60 days. Now we'll think about this in the terms of a year, the life of a deer, and how much a female deer that's pregnant, how much nutrition they need over the course of a year. And you think like, well, anybody here's had a baby before, you notice you're eating more when you're pregnant. And also something I didn't think about is you think certainly that deer is eating a lot during the period of gestation. But also once that fawn is born, their nutritional needs actually continue to increase. So does are dropping their fawns around June 1st. They just started dropping them a few weeks ago. And their nutritional demands continue to increase as they're lactating for their fawns. So this chart probably has fawning about mid-May, but the increase, this nutrition goes up after they have a baby. So they're still they're eating more. So they have increased nutritional demands, and so they're eating more food, sometimes 50% more than they need just in regular maintenance state to survive for themselves. So they're eating for 2. And so that happens right about now, right when your roses are about to bud out, right when all your plants are just getting established. That's when the deer are coming and are getting hungrier than even normal. So this might explain also why you might sometimes see the damage can be seasonal. So now we're going to go, so that was 1 year, and now we're going to go to the biggest is multiple years. What happens, just to help explain what's going on and why this is a vexing problem. So traditionally, we have ecologists like to have models to describe how wildlife populations work. And this blue line here is what we'd call a logistic trend, a logistic model, where it has this exponential growth. And then when it peters off and hits a carrying capacity, it gets steady. And this is the way we model, ecologists will model an ideal population. As there's just a very few, they start reproducing, they reproduce really rapidly, and then they max out the carrying capacity. They take all the food that's available, and then there's not enough food, so there's a mix of starvation and emigration, animals leaving, animals dying, and you kind of get this steady state. That's the ideal. But in reality, we have something more like this red line, where you have populations are going, and then they increase, and they go a little bit too far, they overeat, and then they die back a bit, and then they grow again and go over the top of your carrying capacity, and they drop back down again. And this can vary from food. It can happen from disease, especially we will have outbreaks of a disease called EHD, epizootic hemorrhagic disease. I believe I got that pronunciation right. And it will, it's carried by midges, and it will kill a lot of deer in August. And so we will have big die-offs from this disease that comes at various times, sometimes every 5 or 10 years. You can get it sometimes more frequently, sometimes less. But you can lead to these die-offs and have all of a sudden feel like you don't really have much of a deer problem. And then they recover, then we have. Okay, so backing into this topic, I'm going to back up a couple slides and use that to sort of set the stage for the slide here. So I'm going to back up just a little bit here. So somebody asked me when I was giving this talk, what's causing these spikes? Why are they going out on just this night? And I was like, you know what? That's a great question. I should look at the weather. What's the weather doing? And so I pulled up the rainfall graphs, and it was quite interesting. When I just looked at this date, this was like July 8th, and I looked at the rainfall, and there wasn't any rain on July 8th, but there was rain on July 7th. And I was like, oh, that's weird, like an inch. And then I went over to July 3rd, this peak. There wasn't any on July 2nd, but there was rain on July 1st. I was like, huh. And in almost all these cases, there had been rain a day or two before that spike. So let's investigate this. This is all published in that deer guide. We go into lots of details on how we did this, but this is the chart that comes from this, and it looks all messy and scary. But I will explain this very simply to you. This is time zero on this x-axis on the bottom. And this is the number of hours after rain. So 20 hours after rain, 40 hours after rain. And the blue dots are correlated for how much deer activity is occurring in those numbers of hours after rain. And the blue line is like a smoothed graph that we see based on all these points. Simplify it a little bit. And this dotted line is like a statistical significance factor. So we had 1, 2, 3 of these orange dots was significantly above that line, above the normal when we were about 33 hours after rain to 48 hours after rain, we had these peaks. And when you smooth that out over with a statistical function, that ends up being about 40, I would say roughly 40 to 48 hours after rain, you tend to get a significant increase of deer grazing activity in soybean fields. I think this very much correlates with a lot of gardens and a lot of open areas that deer are coming out of their bedding areas and risking being exposed to get at fresh, nutritious growth in your garden or in your soybean field. So I think that's what's driving a lot of this pattern. And we were able to document this and show that if you're looking to do something and try and protect, I find that time in which all your plants are flush with water that came the day before, they're starting to put a little bit of new growth on, you have a lot of turgor pressure, that's when your deer might be coming out for them. So we looked at some other weather patterns. There's a few other things that worked. We looked at barometric pressure, current precipitation, which is on here, wind speed. There was night, and of course, night we already saw is obviously a very strong, significant, positive, significant predictor for deer activity. So a positive effect here, and it's bolded it as being significant. Wind speed was negatively correlated. So the more wind you had, the less deer activity. So windy nights, a little bit less likely you're going to have deer out in your fields. They'll hunker down. They don't like to come out as much. Barometric pressure did not show anything. I have looked at moon phase over many thousands of camera trap images and have not seen a significant effect of moon phase. But your wind speed and your evening, and whether it's night or not, did come out. You might say, well, precipitation, you were just talking about precipitation. This did not come up as significant because it's precipitation while they're out there. So there's no positive or negative statistical effect of rain itself, current rain for a deer to be out there. But we'll say 2 days after that rain, there's more likely to have them out there. Okay. All right, so let's dive into so we see, all that's all background. About 15 minutes in, now you got a big lay of the land. And now we're going to talk about what do we do to manage this problem. There are 4 main key messages that I have here today. First is habitat and manipulating habitat to try and get deer to go somewhere else. Not perfect. It's a tool in the toolbox. Second is fencing. This is very effective. There's a lot of different types of fence, and we'll go through a few different options. Repellents, they can work. They're not perfect either. They can fail. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about lethal control in hunting. Limited in some scenarios, but I will say in suburban areas, you have a lot of counties in Maryland have very progressive policies on managing deer in their parks and have some very well-run, well-funded programs to help reduce deer densities outside parks. So there's a lot of effort on that. And we can talk about how those are run a little bit, and if you had an HOA or an agreement among neighbors, you could do some of these things yourself to think about how you can control deer with hunting. So let's start in with habitat, vegetation, feed, and cover. What can we do there? First thing, many of you have probably kind of gotten to this point. There's a couple of good resources for unpalatable plants, plants that deer just don't really like. Um, Extension has a guide, Maryland DNR has a guide, and these have 50, 100 plants or more on each guide. So you can reference these and just plant things that deer aren't going to be liking. So if you're thinking about that, that's one approach. Another way is you can just try to attract deer somewhere else. And this is a picture of a food plot in my backyard. I live out in the country in Calvert County. I'm very blessed to be out here in a beautiful spot. And we put out some crimson clover, Austrian winter pea. I think there's some winter wheat in here. And those grew this lush food resource down in the woods where the deer kind of want to be anyways, and gave them some food there so they weren't as enticed to want to come up to the house. I will say in my area, deer are hunted pretty heavily. They tend to stay away from my house because of maybe they know I'm a hunter. Maybe they can just sense me. My neighbors have problems. They never come to my house. I don't know why. They have spidey thing. There's a lot that goes into food plots. I will say you can keep it very simple. You can always just broadcast some seed. You can buy some seed, broadcast it in the fall, late August, early September, and you'll be surprised a lot of this stuff can grow. White clover, crimson clover, winter pea, wheat. I've kind of come around to really liking clovers. I like perennial clovers like white clover. It's kind of expensive seed to buy, but it's pretty vigorous. There's a couple other species. Um, Dr. Craig Harper out of Tennessee has put together a great guide if you really want to dive into this, how to do this. But they don't have to be perfect. You can just get some resources out there for the deer to have. There are cool season plants like your clovers and alfalfa. Chicory, deer love chicory. Just discovered that this year. Big fan of that one. Uh, there are cool season annuals like oats, wheat, winter pea. Um, then there are brassicas. I find deer don't really eat brassicas that much, but some people have good success with that. Then you get warm season food resources for deer, so things in the summer to grow them. Soybeans, corn, all are sort of traditional agricultural crops are great food plots. There's a couple other things like cowpeas or lab. If you're going to grow these, I would say I did not have as much luck with my lab. Cowpeas did pretty good, but soybeans grew more vigorously. I will say they take a lot of work in terms of weed control to make them grow. And deer can, if it's it's like less than an acre, the deer will completely wipe it out and just eat it all. And then you've lost your sort of food plot. So you need to be pretty big, or you can protect it with fences. And then when you do all that, you're trying to get deer to eat this so they're out of your garden. So these are just all the options out there that you can think about. This guide's a good one. We go into a lot of some of these practices and how you might target this. Kathy, jump in, talk to me.
I have a question about, so I love this trap crop idea. But my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong on this, is that there is a law about not attracting nuisance wildlife. So like, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm not feeding rats per se in the city and making a problem for my neighbors. So with this kind of, I feel like it's a gray area, right? But
Yeah.
you have much more space where you are, so you can kind of feed them off. I'm guessing nowhere near where you want the good stuff to be planted. Or if you're a farmer, then you're creating kind of this trap crop food plot for the deer somewhere way away. But then I'm feeling also now you're supporting the deer, so that
We're going to
it's
talk about
tough.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. With all of with several of these, at the end I'll point that out. But yes,
Hmm.
with this one, it's a challenging issue because you're feeding deer, and ultimately you kind of want to marry this with something like lethal control because otherwise you're going to increase the population by giving them more
Yeah.
food, and then
Yeah.
you just sort of then they'll continue to expand into your yard because they've eaten all your clover plots up. So these things are kind of best married with some form of other control, but short term, it might help. Also,
Hmm.
it might help to keep them out of your neighbor's property, or out of your garden. I've never heard anybody having a problem that attracting deer would be something similar to like attracting rats in terms of like an issue there. I mean, in that case, planting hostas, you might be liable for something like that, or anything in your yard, right? A lot of things we plant
Yeah.
in your yard might be attractive. So I I've never heard anybody with that. I would not worry about that at all.
Yeah.
My
I think
experience.
the one instance I've heard is somebody had a salt block or mineral block that they were bringing deer in to a close-in urban neighborhood, and they got in trouble for that. I mean,
Really?
maybe not
Wow.
legal trouble, but trouble with all the surrounding neighbors were not too
Yeah.
happy about it. But yeah, interesting. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, these are attractive, but deer are wild animals and they're going to go where they want to go. So these are sort of like working at the edges, right? It's like it can help. This isn't perfect. And unlike, as you mentioned, we're also like creating more sort of food resources for them and their good populations are going to go up. So I, at the end, I'll talk about how a lot of these things can work together. And actually, I would say for repellents and for the habitat work, habitat like food plots, kind of want to match those with some form of lethal control. So you're like reducing the densities, and you can use these food plots as a way to hunt deer as well. Um, Here's that picture again I showed of the forest. Well, another thing you can do, a lot of us have woods in our backyards. If I look at property owners across Maryland, a lot of us have a small yard and maybe a comparatively larger area of woods. And in those woods, it might look a little bit like, oh, where's my wood? The one like the picture I showed you earlier, where there's not a lot of groceries in the store. So this is another way you can think about. There's a lot of different timber harvest and tree management approaches where you can get more sunlight down to the forest floor. And as I mentioned earlier, this might look like a natural forest, but this is not natural in terms of the fire exclusion that has happened over the last 200 years. Uh, Researchers have looked at tree ring data and have looked at pollen data and found charcoal remnants in pollen and sediment cores, pollen cores, as well, and what plants were growing, as well as tree ring data over trees that were 500 or more years old. And they can find scars of fires on those tree rings dating back several hundred years. And Guyette et al. Published a paper, I think in 2011, and they have a great map. I wish I had it on here for you. I can go pull it up in a minute if someone wants to see it. But the Maryland area would have burned, especially the Eastern Shore and moving up into the coast, all the coastal plain area was between 4 to 6 years. We would have had fire moving through on average. So this woods probably wouldn't have looked like this. Hollies are not particularly adapted to fire, so these might have died in one of those fires. This is a 140-year-old forest. So in that period of time, we would have had a dozen, whatever 5 divided by 140 is, that many fires would have run through here. So many, probably over a dozen, 2 dozen fires would have come through. So it would have been very different looking woods. So I say that my daughter hates it when I cut down trees, but I tried to share information in terms of managing a forest to get more sunlight into the ground also can help improve the health of our forest for birds, for a lot of different animals. So there's a lot that goes into this, but you can also manipulate your forests by getting more sunlight to the ground by removing trees. Here's some approaches you can use. If you have a tree you really like, I like this white oak here on the left. There are a number of competing trees with it. This one right here is a beech. This is another oak. Here's another beech. Here's another beech. All these trees are competing with that main beech. As if you're gardening, you can think about gardening woods. Um, if you have trees right at the base where your plant's growing, they're going to suck water and nutrients as well and compete. So the same thing happens with trees. So you can actually remove trees around the base of a tree you want. That will help that tree do better, and it will get more sunlight to the ground too. And as sunlight comes under the ground, it feeds more deer. Again, kind of counterproductive if you're trying to keep deer away, but it gives them a place to go. They want to be in cover. So providing them that cover in the woods can at least keep them there a little bit more. I think they prefer to be feeding in the forest if there was food there. The problem is a lot of times we don't have food in the forest, so they're really relegated to going into the yards, which is the only place where you have sunlight coming down to the ground. Here's an example of woods that looks very different. You see there's many tons of forage per acre. If you were going and clip off of acres, tons of pounds, thousands of pounds of food for deer to eat on an acre basis. There's a lot more stuff for them to eat here. And they, like I said, they'd rather be in concealed areas. They like to do that. They only come out when they really have to because they're relatively exposed. And I just like to show different options. This is on big scales, this is out in the country, but even on big scales, you can, if you do timber harvest, you can see it might be very jarring, and I just like to share that timber harvest recover very quickly. Uh, this is devil's walking stick. Y'all are gardeners, you probably have seen this. It's maybe a little bit of a weed, but it puts out flowers in the fall that attract butterflies like nothing else I've ever seen. I've seen tiger swallowtails just mob their flowers in late fall. So there's all this vegetation like this comes back when we harvest. And this is actually a relatively rare type of vegetation community left in Maryland. About 4% of our landscape has this type of what we call early successional natural herbaceous vegetation coming back on the landscape. We have a lot of woods. Our forest covers 44% of the state. This is 4%. So we have a relatively, just like to show there's a relative mismatch in terms of available types of habitat. This provides a lot of food for deer, and they will be here. All right. This is for a farmer, but this might apply to you. So if you're farmers grow their crops and he has all these trees going over the edge, this could also be your yard. And so inside there's no food, so they come in here and graze in the center to get food. But one thing you can think about doing is providing food resources inside the woods. Similar things I've already been talking about, and use a process called edge feathering to actually cut down trees near the edge of your yard. Sunlight starts to come down. There is food and cover there outside of your yard, but in the woods that they can now utilize. So there's different types of approaches for this. You can actually put this in the middle of your woods. You can create a patch opening, which can be great for a lot of birds. We're finding a lot of our forest birds come to forest openings and meadows to raise their chicks. So a lot of things you can do to get more sunlight to the ground. You can use herbicide. If you have any questions on this, I'm happy to give you some tips or go through it. But this is a process called hack and squirt where you can just target particular trees and kill them to get more sunlight to the ground. I do this very slowly. I do this with a lot of thought. I wander my yard all the time and I think, well, does that tree, what's dominant? What might I want to open up more? What might I want to reduce? So, okay, enough on the habitat. It's fencing. Let's go. This is probably the simplest thing you can do to protect certain parts of plants in your yard. I have a little video I will put in the chat on how to create one of these little deer exclosures. These are 2 step-in stakes. They call them step-in stakes from Tractor Supply. You can get these online on Amazon too. They're like a few bucks. And they have they have a little pad here you can put your foot on and push into the ground. And they have all these little tabs that fit perfectly into this wire mesh fence. And I use 2 of these, and the wire itself, you can get a big roll of it. This is 3 foot tall, not super tall. I think it's 30, maybe 39 inches. It fits perfectly with these 3 foot step-in stakes. I'm sorry, maybe these are 4 foot. I'll get you the numbers. This is a great little way to protect individual plants. This one on the left will not protect you from rabbits. And I know somebody has rabbit damage. In that case, you can go with chicken wire, which is not as stiff. I don't like to use it if I don't have rabbit damage because it tends to wobble and push over and it's not as easy to stand up. If you're going to do chicken wire, go for the 1-inch diameter holes because small rabbits can get inside the 2-inch diameter chicken wire. So the babies, the juveniles. So that's another practice you can do to protect individual plants. Once they get 3 or 4 feet tall, you can then remove these and the deer will nip at the bottom, but the plant has hopefully grown out the top. So for most our dogwoods, for example, this is around a dogwood on the left, and we have to protect it or deer will come in and eat every single one of those leaves off. It's also a very shaded environment. You can see I've been removing some trees to get more sunlight down, but there's not a whole lot of sun. So that tree also doesn't grow that fast. So when you have slow growth, and actually with just like 10 leaves that a deer can eat in one setting, it makes it very hard for these plants to recover or to outgrow the deer growth. Tree tubes are not really fencing, but they're kind of like fencing. You're protecting it, protecting your little plants with these tree tubes. Put a wooden stake in, and it's sort of like fencing. So I put in the fencing category. If you're planting trees, you want to get some shrubs established, we put these on just to save them from getting browsed down. Okay, so fencing. There's electric fencing might not work in a lot of residential environments, but it could in certain places. think I heard somebody mention they did try an electric fence. This is probably the simplest electric fence you can do. And it has a single charging station here. It's a single strand of what we call polytape wire. It's actually polyester tape, and it has like a thread of metal through the polyester white fabric. And the important thing with this, if you're going to do this, is you see this little tab here. You want to bait and train your deer so that they don't walk up to this thing having no idea what it is and then get shocked. You want them to actually come up and lick this thing and then realize that they don't want to go anywhere near it. The reason for doing that is if they're licking this and get shocked, they stay away. If they have their head under here and they're grazing and it shocks them, they tend to jump up and forward and will take the whole thing with them and short it all out, and it breaks. And it's a big mess. So baiting and training your deer on it for the first few weeks, first few months is important. A lot of people will come back every couple of weeks. You can use peanut butter. You can just take some peanut butter, just put it on the tape. You can put little tabs on it if you want to keep your tape clean. You can use molasses. You can buy molasses at the farm, like local supply store online, and you put molasses on there, come and lick it, and they get shocked and they stay away. So this works. This is again agricultural use, but this could work in a home if you don't have children around. There's obviously certain aspects to think about with that. You can go from that's very simple electric fencing, and if you want to like really keep your deer out of something, you're growing something really special, you can do these double tier fences. Just want to show this as some ideas. You can go taller, you can do 2 strands, 3 strands, or more. It's all semi-temporary, semi-permanent at this point for this structure. The reason this 2-tier thing works is something to think about just as a concept if you're thinking about some of these things. Deer don't have great depth perception. Their eyes are on the side of their head, so they're kind of like 2D in a lot of their field of vision. So they have a hard time knowing when they see this environment, how far away each of these strands is, and it confuses them, and they don't like to go jump through that. And I think that's the thinking why this is quite effective. You can go permanent electric fencing as well. This is at one of our research farms, and we've got some other pictures. This is a cleaner picture of a permanent electric fence, and you can set them up in all sorts of ways with 6 wires, 5 wires. You can have little shorts. There can be a lot that goes into this, but it can be very effective as well. I want to show you all the different options. You can go with a low-cost fence design. We're using plastic mesh, and this can work for periods of time. You can use existing trees, and you can put battens on it so you don't harm the trees. There's a metal wire through the top, and then the plastic fencing hangs down. It's an option. It's an option for you. It might not work for everybody, and this does take maintenance. All these things, you have branches come down, they fall, they can rip holes in your plastic mesh. But it's showing you all the different tools. Somebody in here might be like, that can work for me. It might not work for everybody. It might be a tool in your toolbox. Then you can go Fort Knox, build an 8-foot tall, proper wire mesh fence. This isn't for everybody. This in certain residential environments probably would require some permits, it sounds like. So, but there are people who have recovered their losses in 1 year and paid for their fence. And that fence might have cost them $10,000, $15,000, $20,000, but they were facing that much annual loss from their crops. So in some situations, this can make sense. But just showing you all the different examples. All right. Happy to take any questions. I will say also there's sometimes just small fences, deer don't like to go into small areas. So if you have a small gardened area, just a 4-foot fence might keep them out. A 5-foot fence in a smaller area will do a lot to keep them out. They don't like to be in enclosed environments. And also there's that depth perception thing. So that deer exposure that I started with, if you remember that little circular hoop, it's a 10-foot wide diameter. It's only 4 feet tall. Deer can definitely jump in it. They just don't like to be in this enclosed environment. And we found they don't go into it as long as you don't go bigger than 10 feet. You go bigger than that, eventually they will jump in. So another trick, like if you have just small like garden areas, you can just put up a small fence around that, protect your fence that way. Okay.
Luke, what about the things that are sold commonly that have flashing lights?
I've not researched that personally. I've had people say, I know people that are trying to market some products like this. There are products out west for like coyotes and wolves to reduce, foxes, to sort of get those wildlife away with lights. I think it's a possibility that could work. I think the problem with a lot of these, and we'll get into with repellents, is like the um, habituation effect. They acclimatize to the lights, and if it's there every night, then they stop. You can adjust that with like random timers and things like that. It could work for a while. And that's what the way I feel like a lot of repellents work. They could work relatively short term. Maybe they'll work for a few weeks. Maybe they work a lot. It might be just enough deterrence that they go to your neighbor's yard. That might be all you need. So I think they could be tools. I think you can mix in sound. A lot of the reviews on Amazon for those products are not super great. Unfortunately, I think it's partly that habituation piece. Repellents. So we're going to talk about repellents. These are good, like homeowner options. Irish Spring soap, apparently. I've not tested this scientifically, but I will say Irish Spring soap. With the cheese grater, I've had people just use that and grate cheese around the perimeter of their garden. And it manages to keep the deer away. Um, People will hang them in like pantyhose or socks around their garden. People say that works. Cayenne pepper might be enough of a deterrent to keep them away. A lot of these things, they can wash away, so they require some reapplication. Maybe after every rain, you might go out and grate some more Irish Spring soap on the ground, put more cayenne pepper on the ground. Cayenne pepper is great for any mammals, really. They don't want to, it's, your squirrels and other things can also be deterred by this. But as soon as it rains, it sort of washes into the soil. So, um, the soap might last a little bit longer, but these are sort of like home-based stuff that I've heard good things about. Not done a scientific study of them, but something to think about. I have done scientific studies on several different types of repellents. I've looked at Desex, which is a soap. It's an insecticidal soap. Um, we don't like to eat soap. Deer don't either. There's some plant skid, which has a blood meal odor, and Hinder, which is also a soap-based repellent. We looked at all three of these on a farm field. Um, we also tried something called Penergetic, which was marketed to say that it was going to only require one application and things like that. We went back to the same farm, and I'm just going to share a little bit of this. We sprayed these 3 times every 2 weeks in the first growing season, or through 2 to 3 weeks, and we tried these three things, replicated it. In the second year, we tried two different ones. The Desex. This year, they did not. The year after that, they did not. And we'll think about why.
Luke, you froze for a minute. Can you go back and say which one worked or didn't work? Because
Yes, absolutely. So in the first year, we tried these three. Desex on the top left, which is an insecticidal soap. We tried Plant Skid, which has been around a long time. Probably one of the longest lasting companies. There's a lot of companies that come and go. When we were researching this, like we looked at some old publications, and like 20 companies were no longer in business. Just something might tell you something. And then Hinder here on the bottom. They've been around for a while too. And we just went with the cheap. They all worked. It's same in the first year, they all worked. So we went with the cheapest option, which is this insecticidal soap. Now it will kill insects, which oftentimes is a benefit for gardeners. But if you're looking to bring in pollinators, not a good thing. And I think it only kills insects if it's applied, if it hits them while they are there. So I don't think it lasts long. It's as if you get a contact spray with them. So sprayed all these things. And this is before 2022 is before we had any repellents. It was just like the deer had at it. 2023, that we had a pretty good soybean crop and it worked. I was like, wow, I was surprised. And then 2024 happened and we got this. It was medium. We had some growth, but the deer were definitely there eating. And so what caused that? There's a few different things that it could be. I think you really need to keep looking at these things because there's so many variables that can cause this. But deer certainly can habituate. I think maybe they got used to it and they're like, I don't like the taste of soap, but it's not so bad. Also in 2024, we had a dry year. So there wasn't a lot of vegetation growing. And the plants that were growing weren't growing fast. And so the soybeans started up and they just sort of stalled out. And the key to one of the keys for deer damage is outgrowing and getting to a stage in which they can sustain grazing. Soybeans can handle a lot of deer grazing once they're knee high, or they can handle a lot of, the deer can't eat it all, but they have to get to that point where they're big enough that they've got a lot of leaves. They can branch out and recover. That year it was dry that spring. So the soybeans stopped growing and there might not have been a lot of forage in the woods. Might have driven them into the treated areas and just held their nose rather than starve. They're going to eat something that tastes like soap. Also, some challenges is the sort of reapplication aspect. Sometimes rain and in a gardening environment, you have to get out there and go keep on top of this. So that was repellents. But I also want to share some work about dogs. Sometimes people ask me about dogs. And I had a farmer reach out to me and he's like, have you done any work on dogs? And I was like, well, I've heard these breeds could work. And told him about some deer hunting breeds and other things. And he texted me the next day and says, I'm getting a Catahoula tomorrow. It's going to be delivered at my house tomorrow. I'm going to have a dog. So we started doing this work. There are few key aspects. I think dogs can be very effective if you want to have dogs. So you have to deal with dogs. High energy dogs work better. They must be out at night. So a lot of people have their pets and want to bring in their pets at night. Here, if you want dogs to protect your yard, keep your area nice, they need to be out at night, especially during that key growing season when you want to protect them. Of course, you got to feed them and water them every day, vet bills and all that. But I will say one of the biggest things that might just discourage people are fences and having to deal with construction of a fence or not wanting a fence. There are these collars that are out today. There are several brands of collars that you can create a geofence. You can create a fence on your phone, as you see on this picture in the middle, and it will alert the dog with an electric signal. You can set them with different sort of standards. A lot of them will have like a warning, beep, and then the next layer will be vibration, and after that, it can be a mild shock, and after that, it could be a heavier shock. So you can sort of set these levels, and you want to train your dog to it. And you can see my dog, when she's got her collar on, she does not venture outside of that. And you can see she gets to that warning. She hears a beep and comes right back. And you can see she tested it twice. She got out to the point, came right back. Same up here. So these are very effective for containment of animals. But you do need to leave your animals out at night. But I think they are remarkably good at keeping deer out, especially if they have some natural sort of high energy prey drive kind of dogs. This is a border collie. Catahoula, he had a big Catahoula that was providing some muscle to back up his border collie. Propane can, there's lots of noisemakers, things like that. They can work, I think, relatively short range. They have the same problems as a lot of our other repellents. All right, lastly, lethal control in hunting. This sometimes it's controversial. I will say hunting, I will start by saying hunting helps actually fund 99% of our Department of Natural Resources. The license revenue from hunters, you have to pay $50, $80, $100 for different licenses to hunt. Those get matched with a tax on firearms to fund our Department of Natural Resources. The vast majority of our DNR is funded through hunting. So I will start with that. And I will say, just in terms of why would somebody kill a deer? One aspect I've heard people describe this as that I think one that people could identify with most is that hunters kind of want to participate in the circle of life with the animals in nature. I think that's kind of the best ecological kind of reason I can think about as for why people like to hunt. If anybody's kind of wondered about it, it's not just observing nature, it's like just being part of the circle of life and being part of bringing food home. And I will say, if you're hunting in Maryland, you're not allowed to just waste your meat. You are required to not, there's a law saying you cannot waste your food. So if you're hunting, they're bringing it home to eat legally. So this is a way to form to get nutritious organic venison into your home. All right, so there's a lot of different rules and regulations in hunting. We have very generous, in most of the eastern half of the state, we have very generous hunting rules and regulations. You can take a lot of female deers, which are the key to population control. You can get various types of permits, but for homeowners, it can be challenging. Archery can work in a lot of counties. If you're in a highly dense area, it might not work, but I would say there are a couple of counties, Montgomery County and Howard County, I know, have very sophisticated deer control programs in their parks. And I'll go over some of the keys to how they run those. And again, might be difficult in a suburban environment, but people have done it, and there are various approaches, which I'll go through. Number one, the females drive the population growth, and it's key to focus on the females. Let's see. Somebody could let's just imagine somebody takes all the bucks they see. There's still going to be one buck that's left behind, and he will breed. Say there's 100 deer, half of them are male, half of them are female, and one buck survives, which he will, or a buck immigrates in. He will breed all 50 of those females, and they will still produce another 50 to 100 more deer next year. If you take out 50 of those females and just leave one, you're only going to have one fawn and one or two fawns the next year. So the females are the sort of driving factor of population growth. So that animal is, if somebody's hunting bucks, they really are only just removing that animal, not the future offspring of that animal. So it's really key to go for the does. And there's a few different techniques I'll go through. Again, maybe this isn't applicable to some people, but maybe it is to somebody out there. Maybe they got 5 acres. Legally in Maryland, I believe you have to be, I have this on my chart. I think it's 150 yards from a residence to fire a firearm in certain areas if you're in a place where you can't shoot. The archery range varies by county. In Calvert County, I think it's 100 yards from a residence before you can fire a bow, unless you have that person's permission. And I think it's written permission in the law. So if you have neighbors that are on board with this, you can all get together. And if you don't have, if you're in a city, you have to check your local ordinances. But some of the key things, don't want to educate your deer. The way the parks do this is they have high density hunting on just a few days. So they'll bring in 20 or 30 people and they'll hunt on one day and then they leave. And they're not there for another 3 weeks. And they have another hunt, they bring in 20 or 30 people, and they get as many deer out as they can. So it's trying to reduce that education aspect versus one person coming out once a week. The deer get real smart onto that person and how they hunt and where they hunt, so they're much less effective in general. I have drive deer on here. It can help move deer around. It's tricky. Get in a situation where you actually can do this. I'd like to recommend people to aim for the oldest female first. She is the last one to come out of the woods. Sometimes it's the hardest one to hunt is the oldest, smartest female is the one to start with. Also, there's shot placement. This is more applicable to farmers, but there are different shot placement methods you can use to be able to harvest multiple deer in one sitting, which can be important. If anybody's in a situation where they can use this, happy to go into detail on this. So with that, I will wrap this whole thing up and go back over all of our 4 tools. Got our habitat, fencing, repellents, and lethal control. And I have these arrows from habitat and repellents back to lethal control because if you have a high deer density, they will eat through your food plot and move and continue on. The same with repellents. If there's a high deer density, they will hold their nose rather than starve and oftentimes eat through the repellents. Fencing can operate relatively simply. It could also match up the repellents in one area with some preferred food in another area. So you can kind of match these things together. And with that, I will say thank you. I'm happy to take some questions. And this is my email address. Got an email list. I do a lot of wildlife habitat. So if you'd like to join my email list, you can go to wildlife.umd.edu and just put your email in, and you'll get my emails. Oh, I do have an evaluation. If anybody'd like to fill out an evaluation, you can take a little QR code of that screenshot and go from there. All right. How are we doing? Any questions? Anything in the chat?
That is fantastic. I put the publication that you
Oh, thank you for
mentioned.
doing that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I put that in the chat, but I'm going to go ahead and put it in again so it's at both the top and
There's
the
actually
bottom.
a nicer, if you want to print it, there's a nicer PDF that I'll
Oh,
pull. That's not like on the web version. And I think I
I
think the
just put
PDFs.
the web
I like
version up
PDFs
there.
personally. I don't know if that's silly, but I'll put in the chat too.
Okay. Um, I love the idea of getting them to want to go somewhere else. The trap crop idea, Kathy said that, and I'm thinking that doesn't work so well for me in my suburban neighborhood. I'm about 15 minutes from the University of Maryland, and but maybe I can just go and give out free hostas to all my neighbors, so they'll go eat their hostas and not come anywhere near my supposedly deer safe plants. Um, I put in there that NRCS provides funding for wildlife habitat planting, or if you flood a field, these are all things that are for our hunters, and they provide funding to attract the deer to those agricultural areas. Cindy and David have tried a lot of things. I don't know, Cindy, if you want to come off mute and go through the things that you have tried, because you've got a
8 foot deer busters fencing, 7 foot wire fencing on 3 sides of your yard. Deer still closed. Yeah, there's been I think 8 foot is to be I believe it's 8 foot. There have been tests with 8 foot and it prevents almost all deer from getting out. You still will get some. 8 foot's pretty effective. 7 foot, I'm sure they can clear, especially if they're pressured or they're startled or running away, like you said. Um, 3 sides of the yard is a challenge too. They can sneak in from the backside. So that's another bit of an issue there. But yeah, feel free to jump off the mute and share any thoughts.
And Barkley did ask
Bring
what
you.
happens to the venison when the hunter is hired by the county. I think they give it to the food bank. I don't know if you know more, Luke.
Yeah, for the county management hunts, yeah, you can the hunters can take them home or they can donate them. Yeah,
Hmm.
there's food bank options.
Yeah, the Maryland uh Native Plant Society, when they met in person in Kensington, there was always a gentleman who brought deer meat in like 2 coolers that had been culled. So the Native
Yeah.
Plant Society, as you can imagine, were happy to eat the deer.
I had to hang Irish Spring soap bars and wire cages as crews would take them away. Interesting. Yeah, wire cages or socks probably work pretty good for a while. And battery powered and solar powered ground stakes, which beep when motion activated. Yeah, I could see something like that being a bit help. Cindy and David, I'd love to hear some of your experiences with these. Oh, Olivia, they've not worked for you, huh?
They did not work. I bought them at the
No.
recommendation of someone who's in Washington County, who's a rose gardener, and he said they worked for him, but they did not work where I am.
Yeah.
Oh, the singing trout did not work. That would have been a good thing to try.
I saw they mentioned they use liquid fence and Bobax sprays to deter deer successfully. Yes, and I've also heard of one called Plot Saver. It has a ribbon you put around, looks like that electric fence polytape, and you spray a ribbon around, and then that I've heard people with good success on that.
Yeah, the soaked ribbons are good because it keeps it at the deer's like browse height,
Mhm.
and it doesn't wash away. That's the problem with the sprays is, you get a really good thunderstorm, which we would love, but then what you sprayed is gone. So
Yeah, it's only
Yeah.
going to get worse as it gets drier, and we keep
yeah.
getting more and more drought watch notices.
Mhm.
I have a question, Luke. I like Barclays the spraying with their mother's perfume. I can just see Chanel number 5. My
Yeah.
question was about soybean plant and harvest dates. Are they also you did tie it to the rainfall? So it's about day and a half, 2 days after precipitation. But what about when soybeans are reaching certain growth stages? Is that relevant?
In terms of the palatability,
Yeah, and the
Yes, it
attraction to the
seems
deer.
like when they're younger, they're more attractive. Up until the point when they start putting on their beans, it seems like late in the summer, like August, the leaves I think get a bit more roughage to them. They stop putting out as many leaves. I think they become a little bit less attractive, but deer will still eat them.
I was going to ask you that too, Luke, because I find soybean plants, deer don't like fuzzy leaf texture. And when they mature, they get that really rough fuzziness too. And so the pods too. So
Yeah,
I was surprised when you're saying how much they love soybeans, but yeah, it makes total sense. The tender greens, they would be all over that.
yeah. They'll they'll eat the other stuff too. It's just and I've looked at hairs between different varieties. We're trying to find out some varieties were preferred to others
Hmm.
and did not detect a difference. We found deer liked soybeans and mostly where they came out of the woods. That's where they hit the soybeans, no matter what variety it
Hmm.
was. It's like as
Yeah.
soon as they came out, they wanted to stay covered and concealed, and they would eat there. That was their sort of overriding drive where we were. Um, so yeah, but I think compared to a lot of other things out there, it's high in protein. Even I mean, I've not been able to quantify like mature leaves versus fresh leaves, but they're one of the most preferred food sources in the summer for deer in general. All the deer hunters plant them. That tells you
Mm.
something. The deer hunters want to attract them and feed them. They're planting soybeans for their summer crops. It's high protein and palatable.
What do you think about the Christmas tree idea that Cindy and David have tried, where it smells great to them, but maybe not so much to the deer?
Yeah. Let me see. Let's see. Try to scroll down. Is at the bottom. Replace expired Christmas trees annually along our perimeter fences. Smells great. We feel the deer are repelled by the fragrance. Interesting. I think also not only the fragrance, it's also just an obstruction. So you already have a perimeter fence, so you're sort of reinforcing it. Deer are kind of lazy. It might reduce their kind of desire to jump that fence, makes it wider. Um, could be something about the fragrance or something unusual. I think sometimes the having a new it's the trees probably aren't local, so there's something different, and that can also kind of keep them away as a another additional repellent is what I would think is happening there. I would say it's a structural thing and like a newness thing because in their native environments where they're used to having these, we have cedars and we have pines all over the place. They're not deterred by the necessary. I think it's the newness of that smell in that environment, especially when it just shows up out of nowhere 2 days after Christmas. Like this is not something's up. So I
You
think
don't
that
think
can
deer are
really,
celebrating Christmas too?
oh, they probably are, I guess. And it impairs their field of vision. Yeah. And they have to jump it. It's a lot of tangled stuff. So if there's something really attractive inside, they'll find their way in. But yeah, matching it up with a fence, I could see that being pretty effective just in terms of the bulk of the fence gets a lot wider. Um, going up to the top. Somebody said in the fall, it sounds like some deer management hunting is working and helping in Fairfax County. Understory is not regenerated even after years of the program. I agree. I think there is so much shade in a lot of our forests that there, unless you didn't have any deer, you will not get enough regeneration. So I think forest thinning is a big thing I try to talk about in terms of a lot of our declining birds and our forest birds. Increasingly, we're finding stuff that's saying having some openings in our woods and help our birds. I try to get a certified bow hunter to take out a herd in my neighborhood. Kenny Mack, formerly DNR, said he has to both kill the deer on my property and it has to die on my property. They're likely to keep moving many steps before dying, so no lethal control where I am. They don't have to die on your property. Um, but
They
he does
do.
have
They
to
do
ask
in Montgomery
permission.
County. Yeah, they do in Montgomery County
Oh, do they have an
because
ordinance about
my
this?
next door neighbor, who they would likely die on their property, feels like they're all Bambi, and we have to protect the cute little things.
I don't, there could be some county ordinance.
Yeah.
But what I said, my understanding, barring some county law, you're if a deer runs onto somebody else's property, you can't control that. It's not necessarily your fault. But if you want to recover that deer on somebody else's property, you need to ask them. You need to ask permission. So that's, I think, usually the factor that I run into. is it could go onto the property and die there, but you would need, if they decide that they do not want to allow you access to get it, then you do not have the ability to get it. And then the deer sits there. So I have not heard, unless there's a county ordinance, that is not an issue in most areas, but you do need to ask permission before you go on somebody else's property to recover it. So,
So that makes I think we need to look up this county ordinance and confirm this, because what if you hit a deer with your vehicle and it bounces off the road and then goes into somebody's front lawn? You know what I mean? Like they're
Yeah.
yeah.
gonna doesn't make
And
sense. Doesn't
I
make
don't want the
sense.
deer. Yeah, I don't want the deer.
No.
I don't care where it
Yeah,
is.
nobody
I
wants
just
to
want it dead.
recover the deer, but
Yeah.
they're I guess also don't want collateral damage, like when a deer falls over and smushes everything. But
So a
yeah.
neighbor had a deer crawl under their deck and die, and they called the county to remove it, and the county wouldn't remove it unless it was in a public area. So they, with like a 1 week old newborn, had to drag the damn deer, and I don't know how much they weigh, but had to drag it out to the road, and then called the county back and said, well, now it's dead in the road, and the county came and took it. But what do you do when you're living in an urban suburban area and you've got a large dead animal? It's hard. Luke, I think you're frozen. Either that or you're just stunned and just silent.
Oh, we're
You're
back.
back now.
All right. Sorry about that. I'm going to ask my little AI agent, see what it says about Montgomery County deer.
You might repeat. I think you might have missed that part, Olivia.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, if a deer gets hit by a truck and then wanders into somebody's lawn, then usually it's state highway who would pick it up. It's not the homeowner's fault that it died there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Cindy and David, y'all mentioned that you use small sections of hog wire. Do you find that you have to enclose it completely, or you can just put it on like one or two sides, and that's enough to keep them away from the trees or whatever you've got?
rocks and other surfaces which helps to reroute them. Is that the one you're talking about?
The very last one from Cindy and David.
Yeah. Oh, we place expired trees.
And I've heard other people say that they will put a fence not all the way
Hog
around
wire erection
something,
of plants. Yeah.
but just on a couple of sides, and I don't know how effective that is.
Yeah. It's sort of like that same thing with these tomato cages. That's pretty much. I've actually used my deer exclosures now as tomato cages. They're better. They're more solid. We try everything front, back, or two sides, even bent over in half. Yeah. Yeah. It's a combination of like what else is available for the deer to eat and how uncomfortable it is for them to get there. So if it's something that they are dying for and there's no food, they will go through greater efforts to get through it. If it's something that's like and there's something better like right in front of them, they'll just go right there. So it's like kind of a combination of those two things. And also like there's a function of size of the exclosure, height of the fence. So like if you have 4 foot fence, you can go 10 foot wide. If you have 5 foot fence, you could probably go 12, 15 foot wide. The higher that fence goes, because they can't see through. And then you go to 6 foot, you probably go quite a bit bigger. And then you start going, then you get, if you have a big yard, you gotta get 8 foot to prevent anyone getting over. But I would say like, again, a lot of this depends on like how attractive this stuff is on the other side of the fence that will make them want to get in there. So um, I hope that helps. Yeah, I would say new things also would discourage them. I'm noticing herbs, onions, garlic. Have y'all had luck with some of this garlic or anything?
I have a lot of alliums. It's not helped for me, but
I've heard people also say daffodils have a natural deer do not eat them, and they have some sort of a compound that deer do not like. They'll
yep.
perhaps see that daffodils they can kind of protect their areas with daffodils. I would say it's you know not not it might help a little bit, but if there's something really attractive inside, leave.
Yeah, I have great luck with daffodils. They're all, none of them get eaten, and any tulip, of course, is a deer lollipop. So I just avoid anything that's candy to deer.
Yeah. Or put up without putting up a wire fence or that black mesh. The black mesh is almost invisible, and some of the wire is actually pretty invisible. So you can get black stepping stakes. I mean, it's invisible as you get back away from it, like so bad that I actually mark mine because um, they kind of disappear if you don't put a white stake on them, and people run into them and stuff, or deer will run into them. So I kind of purposely flag them a bit. But that black mesh, it's not super visible. Even the wire disappears. It's the white stakes that make it visible. So there's some aesthetic things you can do to try to make it a little bit nicer.
All right, well, are there any final questions? Luke, thank you for sharing the evening with us and educating us. I love the four tenets you put forth, and the research is really interesting for the ways you test it. So and what you found about the rain, that will help guide us as we go out there and spray our stinky sprays and try those things. But this has been really helpful, and thank you so much for spending the evening with us. And I will send you a copy of the recording later.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for doing that. That'd be great. And yeah, unfortunately, like Cindy and Dave, they've gone through everything. And I feel like the things that I think this helps with is that maybe you've learned some tools that you hadn't tried before. And that's, I think, some of the biggest tricks is like just becoming familiar with some different options that help to combat the issue. But I wish there was a solid silver lining for all this thing. So.
Well, thank you for your persistence in doing the research on it and keeping us educated, and I really appreciate that. And perhaps we'll have you back to talk about rodents, groundhogs, all those things
Yeah.
In the future. So thank you so much, Luke.
Or bobwhites.
Oh, if you can restore to have a healthy population of bobwhites, then you've got everything. So I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, we're working on it.
If you don't know Luke Longnecker in Virginia, you should, because y'all read from the same book. Y'all are speaking the same language
Oh, cool.
about polywire and bobwhites. So he works
Cool.
for Soil and Water Conservation District in Virginia.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
All
Good.
right.
Well, thanks for having me, and we all take care. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye.